Storytelling is probably one of the oldest human art forms. I'd be willing to bet this art form is older than stonemasonry itself. So before we were even able to put together buildings, people were telling stories, people were relating information to one another, passing on myths, passing on oral history. Long before we could even get a bunch of people on board to even want to build a building or something like that, you've got to get a lot of people invested in a story. Obviously, you could round up a bunch of slaves, but that's going to take a lot of power to actually hold them all in cohesion and get them to do what you want. It's a lot easier, I would say, to coerce someone through the power of a good story. The pyramids were likely built by slaves, but I'm sure that those slaves probably had a general idea from their religion or from some narrative on high that what they were building was a monumental project, that it was worth undertaking, and that it was worth exerting all this sweat for. Or they were just very good at bossing their slaves around. Everyone, I think, has felt the utter boredom of being held captive by someone who does not know how to tell a story. I had friends in school who, it's like, this one friend, he would start off stories by saying, well, I woke up this morning, my alarm, it was went 3 minutes before I was supposed to wake up, and I was kind of upset by that, and my back was aching when I first woke up, and it's like, my gosh, dude, could you just get to the important thing? If there's nothing important to say, or if there's no overarching moral, or there's not somewhere we're going, then a lot of times the story can drag. And so the difference between a great story and a mediocre story, or even a bad story, is typically a great story has explanatory power. It helps us understand the world, and also it has a sort of orientating power. It helps us know where we are, where we're going, where we'd like to go. And today I just want to talk about stories and storytelling and how important that is for the student of culture, and also why it's important for someone who maybe wants to shape culture for themselves, someone who wants to be some sort of a thought leader, or they want to be someone who's able to capture attention. Storytelling and being able to understand, analyze, and dissect stories, this is a completely indispensable skill that you need to learn. The person who understands how to analyze and pull apart stories and even construct their own, they are sort of at the headwaters of culture. They're able to direct the flow, direct the current. And if you think about it, everything that causes people to act in a certain way nowadays, or tells people why they ought to do what they ought to do, it's a story, right? Religions tell us stories. Our political agendas tell us stories. If you ask a liberal or a conservative in this country what the story of this country's founding is, you're likely to get two conflicting stories. And so there's this mistake we often make that we think, oh, well, if I just gather the facts, if I just get the facts through some sort of scientific analysis, I will have an idea of the truth. I'll have an idea of what I ought to do. But this is not actually something that raw data or raw facts can give us, which is why you need to be able to understand stories and storytelling. One thing we often overlook is how medium affects story. So what do I mean by this? A medium is essentially a means of affecting or conveying something, right? So a medium can take, many forms. In fact, a medium can take as many forms as a person can imagine. I used to have this idea that medium was just things like speech or music or film or something like that. I thought a medium was related specifically to media in the traditional sense of the word. It wasn't until I heard Marshall McLuhan say that the medium is the message that I really began to understand that medium, or the mode in which a given story or a given effect is affected or delivered, it's a lot more broad than we actually like to think. So whereas most people would define medium as, say, a film or a movie or something like that, Marshall McLuhan said that even roads can be mediums. Because what is a road? A road brings people along a path, and it takes you somewhere. And he actually said that the content of a road was the cars that drive on it. If all the person ever did was to take consideration for the weather of a given day. It's rainy today, it's windy today, it's cloudy today, it's sunny today. And they never took into account things like seasons, or they didn't even know that seasons existed. This would be sort of mistaking the content for the medium. It's thinking that the content of a given piece of content is more important than the medium in which that content is conveyed. So for example, a story being told in the form of an oral myth or an oral history, that's one thing. Or a story being told in the form of a film. In fact, it could be the same story. So the content could be the same, but when the medium is changed, the message is a bit different. I mean, I'm sure we've all, whenever we were kids, we'd go and watch movies, we'd come out of the movie and we would be exceptionally, transformed by the experience of the film. You go and watch Spider-Man and all of a sudden you feel like you're Spider-Man. The same might not happen if someone was to just give you an oral history of Spider-Man. And so what I mean to say is that if you're someone who cares about understanding culture and shaping culture, this concept of medium and the medium being the message, it is an indispensable tool if you want to get at the roots of a given story. Because again, stories are going to be these narratives that tell us who we are, what we're doing, what we ought to be doing, where we're from, who other people are, what they're doing, where they are, where they're going, where they're from, all of these things. So the stories help us orient and explain our worlds, but then the mediums help to convey the stories. We have certain ideas of how we'd like to be portrayed. Cultural relevance has very little to do with our self-imagination. So the story I tell myself about myself is really, it might be a pretty story, I might have pretty good self-esteem, but if I lack self-awareness in this narrative, then what good is it really? If anything, it's going to cause me more damage because I'm going to go out into the world thinking I'm one person and acting a certain way, when in reality, the complete opposite is the truth. Whenever you are deciding to tell a story, right? If you have an agenda, or you have a lesson, or you have even just you want to talk about your day, or you want to recount your experience in some capacity, I think it's worth considering, first of all, what medium you're doing it in, not just the content, right? Ask yourself if the medium is worthwhile. Is the medium in chic, right? Does it possess the ability to hold attention? Because as much as I hate it, I'm sort of a romantic for longer form, things like this. I like to ramble. But we all know short form video content is all the craze nowadays. Maybe if I'm trying to get a story across and I'm trying to get it to as many people as possible, then the medium for that might be short form content. Or if I'm only trying to capture a certain type of person, maybe a particularly thoughtful or insightful person, then I might convey my narrative about how the world is, or I might convey my message through the medium of long-form content, long-form video content. Marshall McLuhan himself, he actually said, if it works, it's obsolete. The problem with any technical discussion of medium is it immediately becomes outdated. If I start talking about AI in this video, it's gonna age very poorly. Like I've seen books that is like, how to get the most out of Google. And now Google, like every time you Google something, the search engine just shows you nothing but AI slop. So it's kind of like, as soon as we get really specific when we're talking about medium, Brian Eno, partly responsible for the advent of ambient music, he actually said that as we sort of press on, the things that were seen as defects of a former medium tend to be what we are nostalgic for. So for example, I'm doing this video on a digital camera, but even though I've pretty much only ever filmed on digital my entire life, I can't tell you how many times I've injected film grain into a digital video because I'm nostalgic for this medium that I never really took part in. In a very literal sense, medium is a way of conveying a message. It's the mode through which a message is conveyed. But then you really don't have to go very far back in time to see how the term medium has also meant, a channeler of spirits. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Long Island Medium. My mom used to watch that show all the time. I think it's quite ridiculous, but mediums are people who are thought to channel spirits. Obviously, you have a lot of charlatans, but this is a sort of a long-running archetype. But anyways, what I mean to say is that, medium is a sort of way of channeling spirits. Whenever you are opting for a certain medium, you are channeling a certain spirit or a certain pattern. I know as soon as I say spirit, a lot of people are going to roll their eyes, right? A lot of you might not be metaphysically minded. You're very scientific minded. The only thing that we know is what we can see or what we can prove or observe, even though that's a claim that we can't, see or know or observe. But what I mean by spirit is something that is really kind of irrefutable. It's not something that you really even have to believe in anything supernatural to be aware of. Whether you treat spirit as something literal or metaphorical, its effects are very real. School spirit, national spirit, the spirit of the age, these are all things that the student of culture needs to be aware of. Because if you deny the existence of spirit, well, I'm sorry to say, you're going to be very much left in the dust. Most stories are there to help explain spirits. You think about oral history. What happens is they would tell stories of their ancestors. Discussions of ancient ancestors in the form of oral history often become compressed into a sort of mythology. Let's say someone who was pretty creative at the art of fishing or very heroic at the art of fishing. Well, they might have their, memory compressed into some myth of a god of the ocean, Poseidon. The people of that time of ancient Greece, they actually believed that Oedipus, who was a real historical figure, descended and was like a great grandson of Poseidon. Stories from their earliest conception have dealt with spirits and gods and ghouls and ghosts. We're approaching an age, the age of AI, where stories of inanimate objects which have spirits put into them and which do our bidding for us, these things are increasingly becoming less and less the thing of myth. You have ancient myths or stories about golems, right? Golems are these constructions that, you put a spirit into it, and then you get it to do your bidding. Realistically, guys, how's that different from the medium of AI? And so we're re-entering this age that is becoming increasingly mystified. Rather than things becoming desacralized, the story of where we're headed, it does seem to be moving ever so slightly back into a sort of mystical, mythological dimension. And I just want you to be aware of this. Everything that I'm saying right now, you don't have to take what I'm saying on faith. Just take it and ingest it, and then next time you're observing culture or you're trying to produce culture of your own, ask yourself if any of these things are coming to mind. And so if we're thinking about mediumism in terms of someone who's channeling a spirit, there's plenty of examples of this, right? The Homeric epics, which talked about the ancient Greek gods, the prophets in scripture. Holy Spirit is sort of guiding them to write scripture, and these scriptures have informed culture for ages now. The West is sort of founded on a certain spirit, you could say. How often have you guys felt stuck? You're trying with all of your might to muster up something. You're trying to force it through, but there's some creative block, something preventing you from actually getting through and getting the thing done. And then all of a sudden it's like as if possessed. It just comes through. It just shoots through, and you're just writing, or you're creating, or isn't that strange? That's strange to me. We ourselves are mediums. The human being is a medium. As we move into the age of automation, we have to think about human beings as a sort of medium, and culture itself as the content by which the medium is expressing itself. You need to be aware of this sort of mystical, spiritual dimension of storytelling, of the origin of cultures, because all cultures are founded on some kind of a story. And if you don't know the purpose of stories, or you don't know how stories are formed, or where they come from, or what they deal with, then you're going to be lost. Someone who understood stories on a very fundamental level was Nietzsche, and he taught Greek. And so he was reading the ancient Greek stories and even things like the New Testament in their original languages on account of his deep familiarity and intimacy with these foundational stories, these stories that entire civilizations have been based on. He was able to see a sort of swelling tide of sentiment that was rising. He proclaimed in his book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, that God is dead, and that no rivers or no waters could wash the blood from our hands, which in his own language was prophetic warning about the disasters that would occur in the wars of the 20th century. What we have in the 20th century is a collapsing of narratives, a collapsing of certain stories. What we have now in our day, as chaos mounts, is a collapsing of narratives. Certain narratives about who we are, where we're going, where we ought to go, are collapsing. People are not buying certain narratives anymore. And there is sort of a fight to determine which narrative we should be guided by. Again, Everything I'm saying to you, dear listener, is for the sake of your own survival. I'm just trying to put you on to the concept of narrative and myth and the medium as things that can help you sort of have a meta awareness of where we're going, where we'd like to go. All of this is meant to sort of generate a self-honesty as we go barreling into this brave new world. Our world is becoming increasingly global. And so national narratives or narratives of certain people groups are disintegrating at the same time that internet and AI are sort of decentralizing all information and making all information available at all times to all people. And so there really is a fight for people to determine what is true. A weakness would be to say, well, because there are so many narratives, maybe they're all true. Maybe it's all true, or maybe they're all not true. Maybe it's impossible to come up with any sort of map of reality or any narrative that helps us orient. I think this is a cop-out. And why? I think it's because when you say that all of those things are true, that's a objective universal claim. So you're saying that we can definitively know that all of these stories are true. Not only that, but I think it betrays a certain lack of familiarity with the nature of stories and also the stories that are available. Some of these stories are mutually exclusive. The individual has to sort of make a choice without criteria. These narratives help us with emotional regulation, so it's not like it's easy or simple or straightforward to deconstruct someone's narrative. It's an uncomfortable process. At the risk of a total destruction of identity, I think it's important for us to be aware of how we construct stories. The stories that we already believe in, and maybe which stories might serve us better. Check out my newsletter, sign up for free at the link below, and I'll see you later.